that's kind of a narrative that exists worldwide, that there are government programs.
Fiction or non-fiction narrative?
Well, I think there's a lot to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that with some authority is that I spent a lot of time trying to get access to Australian government files.
Yeah. So this brings me to something else, because I saw that you were one of the first civilians in the 80s, I believe, to gain access to the Royal Australian Air Force's classified UFO files.
Yeah, let me get a bit of a reality check here, like, borrow Ross's name for his show with News Nation. He's got now, reality check. Yeah. The big plug, Ross, you owe me one. So, the issue with the RAAF and Department of Defence here in Australia was that throughout the 70s they were saying anybody who's curious about the UFO subject, or they used a term which is no longer prevalent, UAS, unusual aerial sightings.
Right.
And at some point during the 60s they started pumping out annual summaries. And so anybody, if you contact the Air Force or the Department of Defence, they'd send you off a standard letter and include a summary of the last year's reports. And this went on for quite a while, and it was a great way for the Department of Defence to answer responses. But there was this consistent figure of what they referred to as unexplained, unresolved cases. Around about 3 to 4% of all the sightings were difficult to explain, and they said that was due to not enough information, or it could have been due to it being a true UFO. Now, but civilian researchers tried to get access to a lot of those files during the 60s, and there was very limited success. I think Paul Norman and Judy McGee from the Victorian group, when the military headquarters were based in Victoria, got a little bit of limited access to the files. But I started to look into it more deeply, and I had a science background and went through university and that kind of stuff, and got a honours science degree, majoring in chemistry and pure mathematics kind of thing. It was but all that did was gave you, I guess, the skills of diving deep and always knowing to really go hard and figure out what's behind a story. Don't just go for the surface detail, because really the reality might be far different to what the surface detail is. And so eventually I started a bit of a long campaign, mainly initially through letter writing, to get access to the government files on UFOs. And basically what was the end result? Bugger all, nothing. They'd send you a few little reports, usually redacted, meaning that parts were censored.
So when you got access to these files, it's not like you actually went somewhere to see them?
I did eventually.
Oh, okay.
I did eventually.
All right.
I thought, they kept saying that anybody could get access to the file, but the reality was you couldn't.
Yeah.
And in the end, I started, and what turned it over for me personally at the time was that in 1981, I got appendicitis.
Yeah.
And I ended up having 2 weeks in hospital, and that was right between I was transitioning from one quality assurance management job into another company.
Yeah.
And the guy I was replacing was going off to be the international quality assurance manager based in Chicago, and I was taking his job over in just north of Hornsby at a factory site there. And we went off together and had a bit of a mad dinner, booze up, whatever, and we both came down with food poisoning.
Yeah.
He managed to recover enough to get on the flight and go to the States. He must have been in pretty bad shape. But me, I just got worse and worse, and then ended up appendicitis.
Yeah.
And it was in that period of 2 weeks recovery. I even got peritonitis. Very dangerous thing, appendicitis. But I decided, here I am stuck in bed, can't go anywhere, still trying to recover. What the hell? I'll start a phone campaign talking to the Department of Defence and keep going and not accepting no. And I just kept going on and on and on. And over a couple of months, I eventually got what I wanted, and that was that they agreed to allow me to have access at the Department of Defence headquarters in Canberra and examine the files there on the spot.
Damn.
So,
all right.
They kind of probably expected me to turn up on the day, look at, a few files, etc., and go home happy. Well, I arrived on the Monday morning at 9 o'clock, and I finished my exercise on Friday at 5 o'clock.
You went through
5 days. No, but
shit, 5 days of it.
5 full days going through files.
Fucking hell.
But that told me that I was looking at about one of the key things I was looking for were indicators of file numbers. And so I wanted to identify what the whole paper trail was within the Department of Defence, not only with Air Force, but the Navy, Army, and also within military intelligence. Who were the main players, trying to identify all this. That's what I call diving deep, the deep dive.
But if there was something in those files that, someone didn't want you to see, they would have
of course
taken them out.
Of course, like the absurdity of it. Really, on the first day, I'm waiting for the files to turn up, and in comes the poor secretarial and clerical people. They're dragging 3 big, I think it was 3 big postal sacks full of files. And I thought, this is a pretty unusual way to deliver files. So anyway, I pulled them all out, laid them all out in order, started quickly going through them. And then after about 45 minutes, they came rushing back and saying, "Oh, Bill, sorry, our apologies. Unfortunately, these files haven't been declassified yet. You're not supposed to be looking at classified files." So some poor bastard had to sit down for an hour or so doing the rubber stamp, literally going on every single page on every file, unclassified, and signing it and dating it.
Right.
That was part of the system.
Would that not be the process of like picking which ones you can and can't see, but?
Not really by that stage, no.
No?
They obviously made the assumption that it had been cleared to look at the files,
right,
but the files themselves had to be declassified.
Okay, so what is some of the most interesting things that you found in these files?
Look, what I found was essentially the Air Force was grappling with the same sort of problem that civilian researchers have been grappling with for decades. The only thing different was that they had access to perhaps better facilities if they ever got to the point where they were seriously interested in the subject. Most of the time they tried to deflect it. They weren't interested. But even when their own personnel were witnessing UFO phenomena, they tended to downplay it.
Yeah.
That's at the upper echelons. And yet
when their own personnel.
Yeah, so, pilots.
Yeah, pilots and
Air Force pilots, naval pilots.
Yeah.
One of the classic UFO cases that I often refer to as one of my favourite cases was back in 1954. Oh, okay. In 1954, there was a worldwide UFO flying saucer wave. And in Australia, it was no exception, but we had a breakout of sightings in Victoria in January, and then it sort of went quiet, and then it took off again in May, June. But one of the biggest sightings was a case of during late August 1954, there was a naval Sea Fury pilot by the name of James O'Farrell. He had the nickname Seamus. That's how I got to know him. And I got to meet him directly, personally. And he, in fact, was there for the book launch of my book, The Oz Files, at the State Library in New South Wales. And that was a dark and stormy night, that book launch. It was one of the worst nights of weather in Sydney for a decade. You don't plan these things, but that's the way it was. But so we were all stuck inside, huddled, bunkered down deep within the State Library while there was a major storm. And it took me hours and hours to get home. The storm was really bad. But anyway, cut a long story short, Seamus O'Farrell was flying a naval Sea Fury plane, doing a cross-country run, and he was over the Goulburn area of New South Wales or near it. And he sees two objects, bright lights, come and take a position either side of his aircraft. and he's thinking, what the hell is this, And he's thinking, if I report this to Naval Ground Station at Nowra, my flying career will go down the gurgle. So he's thinking, I don't think I'll report this. I'll just keep flying and hope they don't do anything. And then on the radio come, the awaited regular navigation check. And then at the end of that, the Nowra Naval Air Station saying, oh, yeah, by the way, we got 2 aircraft that seem to be tracking you either side. Can you tell us what's going on? Basically, ad-libbing there a bit. And he told me that he said, I could have kissed those guys because they took the heat off me. I didn't have to report the UFO. They were asking me. And they said that we're tracking it on radar. And so you had radar correlation, of what was happening to him.
Yeah.
Anyway, he said that one of the objects crossed in front of him. At one point, these objects came in so close to him that he thought in his head, we're going to have a mid-air collision. And as soon as he thought that, they moved out again. And he thought, what the hell's going on there? And he thought for a moment, are they reading my mind or what? But then one of the objects passed in front of him, and the two of them then take off, and it made him, he said, it made me look as though I'm flying one of the fastest planes in Australian skies, and it made me look as though I was standing still.
And how many different people? So he was obviously the only one in the plane.
And you
got 2 people on the ground.
Yeah, it had Nowra and the people in the radar room that were tracking it on radar.
Okay.
And there were 2 separate witnesses. Narralluin, I think it was. There was a ground trig marker where I think a PMG technician saw it go over.
Yeah.
And also, in terms of its track towards Sydney, guys in air traffic control at Sydney Airport also witnessed it. So that was a major sighting.
Yeah.
And it caused the Australian military intelligence machine, and that included the newly formed Joint Intelligence Organisation that was to coordinate intelligence right across all the military departments, to wake up and take notice. Whoa, and everybody said that he was a reliable witness and all that kind of stuff, So
do you think like highly regarded military officials, pilots, whatnot, are scared to report these types of sightings?
Still.
Because
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's even worse now